the meeting of the Board of Education of November 3rd, 2021, and we will start off with our Pledge of Allegiance. Join me in standing for the pledge. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Morris, will you read our commitment to community?
Yes. Citizens of our community, we will conduct ourselves in accordance with Newtown's core character attributes and display human character traits. We will be responsible for our actions and show respect for each other. We will interact peacefully, productively, and politely. We will be trustworthy and honest and show compassion toward others. Newtown's continued success is contingent upon our ability to persevere, to follow through with our commitments, and to stay focused on the greater good.
Thank you. All right. And that brings us to our celebration of excellence, and I will turn it over to Dr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Dr. Koo, and welcome everyone. This evening, we are recognizing the Newtown High School athletic program, along with its athletic director, Mr. Matt Memoli, for receiving the CIAC Fred Balsamo Sportsmanship Award. This award is only given to one school in the state of Connecticut each year for an athletic program that continues to seek ways of promoting the growth of students and supporting the ideals of good sportsmanship. This also comes with a $400 monetary award to be used by the athletic department and a plaque. The award will be presented on December 7th at a CIAC Sportsmanship Conference. This evening, we have Director of Athletics, Matt Memoli, who will introduce the group that he has in front of him and to say a few words about the program.
I first of all feel very, I don't know what the word is, but I feel like behind me should be all 100, and I think we have 113 coaches, and we had almost 500 kids in fall athletics this year. And I feel like they all should be here in this library right now to accept this award as well, because it's only so much that I can do. But I've been so blessed to have coaches like the coaches we have here and the kids that we have here as well to accept this award, because I feel like ever since I started in Newtown, as a teacher and as a coach, we've had something so special, and to be awarded this as one school in the entire state is very humbling for me, I know, because obviously I put in a lot of time, but the coaches that we have and the kids that we have, the amount of time and effort and energy that they put in on a daily basis is amazing. So I'm very happy. I just brought some of our student athletes here, and I think something else that really kind of sets us apart is how we support each other, and we support the athletic department, and we have this year, I think more than ever, we've had so many students coming out to support our events, but they're just so positive and professional, and it's like, it's not always the way it is, all the time. So I want to thank all of our students who came out. We have Ryan Verdi, Morgan Malillo, Jake Gonski, Andrew Jacobs, Ellen McCarthy, Bella Gerace, Elise Baricelli, and Jake Bulkley as well. And our coaches that came out, Becky Osborne. So Becky coaches everything and anything I ask her to coach. She does swim, indoor track, outdoor track. Scott Bulkley is our head boys lacrosse coach, and Ellen Goyda is our head field hockey coach. So like I said, I wish I had every one of my coaches here and every one of our student athletes. And thanks to the board for all your support, and the administration of the high school as well. Because like I said again, it's very special here. And so thanks to all of you. I know they're not here for, they are, but they're presenting the health curriculum or whatnot, but these ladies here as well. Laura McLean, I don't know how much you know, she's another one. Laura, coach this, coach that, coach the other thing, and while you're doing that, coach this too. Kathy Davey, who has done so much over her years. Cheryl Lombardo, who I'm going to probably look at my crystal ball 2 years, maybe 3, when her kids are a little bit more, she'll be coming back to coach Ruth as well. So make sure that the minutes and all this is on record. So in 2022 or 23, we can look back. Thank you, guys.
Lori, is this the first time this award has been given to the town?
I don't know, maybe Matt knows that.
Yeah, so the actual sportsmanship award, yeah, it was named something differently, but they just changed it to name it after Fred Balsamo, who's the CIC rep. He's worked there for years and he's coached and he was an AD, so they changed the name. But this is, yeah, the first time that we've actually won this award as, the only school over the years.
Fantastic, congratulations, that's great news, and especially after all the times that you come and present your budget to us, and we
A
we
more
go
months
over
for that,
in
right?
such
Don't I have a
great
little more
detail.
time? No.
Yeah, so thank you so much, that's fantastic news, and congratulations.
Thank you guys very much.
And remember, you have $400
Right.
to subtract from your budget.
Right, yeah. That's going to be a party for these guys.
Yeah, so we'll just take like a 5-minute break. There's some refreshments over here on the counter. We'll just mingle and celebrate together for just a few minutes, and we'll be done
Awesome.
with our meeting.
That's wonderful.
All right, so we'll start off with our consent agenda, and I will entertain a motion on that.
I move that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda, which includes the correspondence report.
Second.
All right, so Mr. Delay makes the motion, Mr. Persson seconds the motion. If anything needs to be removed, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None, so that passes unanimously. And that brings us to our public participation. Shall I read it? I won't even bother reading. If you want to know the rules for public participation, they're right here on the agenda. Just try to limit it to 3 minutes. Give us your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Janice Gabriel. I am the theater teacher at the high school, and I wanted to come and tell you publicly that live theater is back, and we are very excited. And I wanted to formally invite you. All of you will get your email from me. I wanted to formally invite you November 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st to the fall drama, which is Pups. And for those of you that don't know Pups, it is a parody on a certain boy wizard that goes to a certain school of magic and magic. And I hope that you can figure it out from there, because I can't say what that series is, because I will get slapped with copyright. But it is a very funny show. It's a comedy. Our students are so excited to be back on stage, and we hope that you will join us. All of you are invited to bring a guest and be our guest at the show. And we hope that you will come. It's been a long 2 years since we've had our last formal live show. All guests will be masked. Our students will also be masked. But we don't care. It's in person, and there's going to be joy and laughter, and we just hope that you'll be there. So the 18th, 19th, 20th at 7 p.m., and Sunday, the 21st at 2. So we hope that you will join us for some laughter and joy on stage.
Thank you so much.
Very much appreciate
Thank you. Although I must say, I did enjoy the way you did the ones that were not in person. That was creative the way you put those together. So
We may do the best that we could with no live theater, but we are so happy to be live again. So,
good.
thank you all for your support and for supporting us through live streaming. And thank you for supporting us through live theater as well.
Thank you.
Saturday at 7.
Saturday, yes. Thursday, Friday, Saturday at 7, and Sunday at 2.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, is there anybody else from the public who would like to address the board? All right, sensing none, I will close out public participation, and that will bring us to our reports. I will be very brief. I'll just say that December 8th, CAVE has a new board member conference in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, for any new board members. We often have them in the audience, but, so there's also, December 16th is our board member workshop. That'll be with, Nick Russo from CAVE. I know that there's also our attorney, our legal counsel, does provide a free workshop once a year, so if that's something that the board is interested in, that would be something that we could arrange as well. And then finally, just congratulations to Dan Cruzon and his reelection to the board. It's good to see you coming back. And that concludes my report, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Dr. Koo. I also wanted to congratulate all of the new candidates to the Board of Education, including, of course, Mr. Cruzon, and also for Dr. Koo, even though I'm sad about this, will be joining the Legislative Council, so congratulations. I sent a communication to parents and staff yesterday to discuss a new option for quarantining that is being proposed by the DPH. I think I've mentioned it in some of my Sunday highlights that we've had ongoing dialogue with the Department of Public Health, all of the superintendents across the state, and they have listened and come up with hopefully a good option for districts and families. More details of that will come out, I believe, in a press conference that is slated for tomorrow. And I'm hoping to send further details to families on Friday. All I can say is that it should help minimize the number of quarantines that have occurred as a result of the current protocol policy that we do have in place and we've been following. We had 100, just to give you some perspective, we had 114 students quarantined in August and September and 234 in October. That's a lot of students quarantined, and that is up on the dashboard. So I feel, and I know many others feel, we need to balance the benefits of students and their safety and the costs of not being in school and the social emotional issues, of course, that go along with not being in school. So as soon as this does get publicized, I will be sending out details. In that same communication I've asked parents to check whether they have opted in to receiving communication, in particular school messenger, as this is critical when we're sending out alerts that we may not be able to do with much advance notice. For example, a bus that is parked in the early AM, or of course a bus that has to be parked in the afternoon. So our principals are getting the messages out as soon as they can. All-Star does not have the capacity to do that. We're the only ones that use the school messenger system. So I want to make sure that parents can get that message through texting if they should so choose to have that when a bus driver needs to leave for an emergency. And that's already occurred, either calling in sick or there's a personal emergency that we've had just in the past month. So this is important. So that did go out. We've streamlined to make sure that parents know how to get into the parent portal, and hopefully this will help some of the issues that we've had. So we are, again, as I've said it again and again, we continue to work with All-Star as they're looking for new bus drivers. We have 2 new bus drivers coming on, and I think there's 3 more following that. DMV is trying to get through as quickly as they can because there is a backlog. No matter how we try to move everyone through quicker, there is a backlog there, so we're doing the best we can. And on a happy note, Election Day was also a professional day for all of our teachers. They worked in their buildings with leaders and had a really productive day. They also brought in non-perishable items for the Faith Food Pantry, and they received a ticket in doing so into a drawing to receive their own basket of goodies. And I want to say thank you to all of our generous staff for their contributions to the needy families in our community. And I know that the conversation we had, or actually it was Kathy, who communicated with the Faith Food Pantry, and they were thrilled to have more non-perishable goods.
I had to speak to Lee Paulson today to arrange time to pick up, and she was just
It's wonderful. So again, thank you to all of our very generous staff. That's all I have.
So I said I was going to let you you speak about the referendum.
Oh, but I missed that, didn't I? Oh, that's the big
I
winner
did not
of last
steal the
night.
thunder.
Oh, I'm so sorry. The big winner, I went right over that. The big winner, we are so excited that the Hawley HVAC project passed last night in the referendum, thanks to all of our parents and community who supported that project in the best interest of all of our students. I know that families are thrilled, and that was just a wonderful night to hear that passed in such a big way as well. It was great. I'm sorry. I'm so glad you reminded me.
Couldn't let that go.
The happiest note of the night, actually.
All right, so Mr. Krusan, and then we'll go to Ms. Kowski.
Do you know how many non-perishable items were collected yesterday?
Actually, we haven't counted them yet, but it was every single building, so they haven't even
I was just
collected.
wondering if there's a ballpark even.
No, I could give it to you then once we look through all of the bins that are being taken over. I don't think they're being taken over until tomorrow or Friday.
There are 2 to 3 bins in each school. We have largely in our central office as well.
We collected there as well.
Just curious. It's great that was happening, so curious how much.
We'll let you know.
Ms. Kowski?
Yeah, what PD happened at the various schools, just a summary?
I can actually have Ann speak to that because there were different things going on at different schools.
I think it's in the CNI report too.
Yes, it is.
There was a variety of things based on their needs. So our K-5 teachers participated in the additional bridges training. Teachers in 6 or 8 who are piloting new programs also had online training. We offered additional iReady training to social studies teachers and science teachers and other interventionists in the middle school so they could use those results. I worked with the K-8 counselors on EduClimber, training them on EduClimber. There was Newzella training offered, so there was a variety of things at the high school. I know they participated as a whole staff in some DEI work in the morning and then broke out in departments in the afternoon. So there was a variety of offerings.
And I know our new coordinator, Wesley Johnson, participated with the high school staff.
Thank you. All right, any other questions?
Yes, I need to thank colleagues on this board that worked to get the HVAC quality project understood and subsequently passed.
Thank you.
Right.
All right, so we'll move to committee reports. Oh, go ahead.
Dr. Rodriguez, the COVID numbers, were a lot of those from outside of school, incidents of?
Yes, actually, it was.
Yeah.
What we've seen, and I've talked about this with the Director of Health and with Ann Dalton, our supervising nurse, a lot of it is in the community, and that's what we're seeing, families. So, but when there's a contact, the issue with the high numbers is the protocol itself and the distance between those contacts, and we have to follow that, especially in the cafeteria where they're unmasked and not in less than 6 feet. Certainly on buses, but I believe the new quarantine protocol is going to amend that a bit to make it a lot more flexible and not as restrictive. You're welcome.
All right, so committee reports, do we have CNI, you want to do policy first?
So the policy committee met last week. We continued to discuss the policy around required COVID vaccinations with some samples of best practices from other districts and advice from our legal counsel. We are continuing to review that and will hopefully bring it to the board fairly soon. We discussed the policies that are actually on the agenda tonight for second read, which were the search and seizure and the breathalyzer policy. We also discussed with Ms. Vadas the budget procedures and line item transfers policy, which
I would hear from the firm of David and Lombardo on 1 and 2, which you will find wonderful. Thank you. We also spoke, Frank Carl spoke to us about English language learners and how many there are in the district. I believe he said 51. I think I heard that number, and increasing. So they, the teachers of that entity are being given resources so that there's adequate translation for those children, especially in Spanish, because the translation is important because it doesn't sometimes translate the same way. And so it's important that we're getting accurate results from our assessments for those children. Anne presented to you the November 2nd Professional Development Day, which was highly successful. On October 20th, professional development was held for about 150 paraeducators. And on November 2nd, the school secretaries prepared the I-Ready reports to be mailed out on November 13th. And that concludes my CNI report. Thank you.
And communications, more beyond what we'll discuss in the future.
I was going to say, you really think all we did was the newsletter team meeting? Of course we did more.
Okay.
We did finalize the newsletter that's coming before the board today, but we also continue to develop what is going to be our next newsletter, which we're aiming for January, and it's going to be on curriculum and classroom instruction.
All right. Any other committee? Liaison activities? No? Okay. So we'll move on to our high school student report.
Good evening, everyone. We have some exciting events to share with you as the first quarter comes to an end. College visits are still successfully continuing for those who are interested in learning more about furthering their education. Pencils of Promise is holding a book drive from now until November 24th. The books are being donated to Savoy Elementary School in Washington, D.C. This is one of the most impoverished districts in D.C. There will be a meeting for all students interested in playing NHS baseball this Friday, November 5th. This week, GSA is hosting Solidarity Week. On Monday, students changed their social media profile pictures to show support for the LGBTQ community. Today, students joined GSA members for their annual open house. Tomorrow, GSA members will dress each in a different color of the rainbow. On Friday, students will sign Ally Pledge cards. The National English Honor Society will have a meeting tomorrow. The class of 2023 class ring sale has begun, and there will be a representative at the school to help with sizing tomorrow and Friday. The Leo Club had a meeting right after school this afternoon. The Nice Club had their first meeting on Monday. They learned more about international cultures and unique cuisines. More Than a Book Club met Friday morning for the first time this year. The senior class was sized for graduation caps and gowns on Thursday and Friday of last week and were able to purchase class reins and extra tassels. Linker had a Halloween movie night last Thursday. It was for Linker leaders and their freshmen to socialize while watching Scary Stories to Tell in return. Best Buddies had a lip sync / karaoke battle since the last meeting. Tabletop Club had their first meeting on Tuesday, October 26th.
All right, here's a look at some other activities. So varsity girls swim and dive finished the regular season 8-2, capping it off with a dominant win over Massac. The SWC Diving Championship meet started today at 5 p.m. at Weston. The SWC Swimming Championship meet will take place on Saturday at Massac at 3:30 p.m. Afterwards, the team will prepare for states, which will begin the 10th for diving and the 13th for the swimmers. Following a 12-3-1 regular season, varsity girls soccer took on Weston yesterday in the SWC finals after beating Immaculate 1-0 in overtime for the quarterfinals on Friday. They lost a tough one and now look to states, which will start next week. Varsity boys soccer went 8-4-3 on the regular season, but unfortunately lost a close one to Bethel in the SWC quarterfinals. They turn to states as well, which begins next week. Varsity boys cross country had their CIAC cross country Class L championship on Monday at Wickham Park. The state open meet will take place this Friday. Varsity girls cross country had their SWC championship meet on October 20th, in which two of our runners earned all SWC. They then had their CIC cross country championship meet on Monday as well, and now have their state open meet on Friday. Varsity field hockey beat Immaculate last Thursday in their SWC quarterfinal match. They then took out Massick yesterday at Blue and Gold Stadium in the semifinals and won 1-0 in overtime. They now look to the SWC championship, which will be tomorrow, and then their state's run will kick off next week. After a successful 14-5 regular season, varsity girls volleyball beat Massick 3-0 in the SWC quarterfinal, and now face Pop Frog today for the semifinals, which started at 6. States for them will start on Monday. The football team is now 4-3 after beating Manel on the 20th, but then losing 28-31 against Shelton on Friday. Their next game will be at Weston this Friday. Our unified soccer team welcomed Brookfield, Massick, New Milford, and Bethel to Blue and Gold for our annual tournament last week. The whole field hockey team came to watch and support. Newtown BOE had a successful competition at Manel on October 23rd, and then competed in the U.S. Band's New England States Championships on the 30th. And now they look on to the U.S. Band's National Championships, which they will be traveling to MetLife Stadium for this Saturday. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Questions?
I have a request to you. Would it be possible in the next few meetings to give us some idea of what other clubs and activities are going on at the high school, so that we tap into the variety and the diversity that we have up there? It would be great for all of us to know, and especially the newcomers that are coming onto the board. It's very important for them to know extensive variety of what's offered. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we do
Thank
have
you very much.
a variety of clubs, so we'll be sure to touch on that.
Thank you.
Try to get a bullet on everything.
Perfect. Thank
We'll run down.
you. In 3 minutes or what?
Yeah, that's key.
Make a poster, Christine.
Yeah.
You are doing a fairly comprehensive rundown of what's the activities that are happening, like currently today and this week, and right? I mean, or are there pieces that are missing? I guess.
No, I always write the reports that I get out there.
Yeah. And the clubs and.
Yeah, these are the clubs that are being announced on the announcements right now, their first meeting, stuff like that. So usually, the ones we say are the ones that are happening right now, but we'll definitely be sure to come up with a list of all the ones offered.
Might be over
Uh-huh. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much. Thank you.
All right, so that brings us.
Thank you.
Right, there's quite a pile left over there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheerleaders in the audience. So that'll bring us to our presentation on the Health 1 and 2 curriculum. We'll give you
4.
Yeah.
So, hello and good evening. I'm Kathy Davey,
Laura Lee and Cheryl Barlow.
and we are 3 of the 7 health teachers up at the high school. And we took charge of developing the Health 1 and Health 2 curriculum. So if you could do the first slide. So in addressing the health curriculum and our writing process, the state had changed and had reformatted their curriculum framework, the balance incorporate that as well. And in doing that, we followed their unit topics, their concepts of self-awareness, decision-making, relationships, social awareness, and self-management. So you will see that both Health 1 and Health 2 have those unit titles, and our lenses are similar as well. However, our activities are different in what we do. In Health 1, go ahead. In Health 1, so there's our unit titles, lenses. The big thing in Health 1 is our decision-making. Most of the students who come into Health 1 are either freshmen or sophomores, so they're new. So we want to make sure to give them the same framework and same skills in each of the units. This first one in self-awareness, we want the students to identify dimensions of wellness, 7 dimensions of wellness. And for several of them, the idea of looking at employment that's one of the dimensions that they're looking at. You know, it's different, so it's interesting. We want the students to have the ability to practice healthy things and behaviors, and we do that when we talk about themselves in the All About Me project. And we want them to be able to access their strengths and their limitations. In responsible decision making, these themes, when you look at them, when you read through the curriculum, you're going to realize the themes run throughout. But the subtopics and what we do, they also run out. So when we're talking about decision making, we talk about decision making when we do 7 dimensions of wellness, when we're talking about nutrition, when we talk about relationships. We put the students in those situations and help them work through the decisions that they make and then reflect on those decisions. Moving on to relationship skills, communication is a big one. When we talk about family relationships, we talk about the effects of substance abuse and how that affects not only them, family, community. Again, we want the students to know the positive and negative influences when they talk about healthy relationships. In social awareness, we want them to find valid information, products, services to enhance their understanding. We want them to be empathetic, and we hope that our goal is to have them through the different projects, especially the Ideal School project, to look at all aspects. What do they find socially, what do they want for their peers, what do they want for their community as they come. And then the last one, self-management. This is when we get into their own personal care. And we talk about nutrition. Nutrition is actually a very intense unit that they'll look at their own nutrition intake and can start making decisions on what's good for them, especially where they are in their life. And then we also do breast cancer and testicular cancer. We talk about that and how you self-exam. So, as I said, this is really a very basic is not the right, it's a good, strong introduction for the students because they're just coming into their own coming to the high school. And then when they are successful and are able to go on to Health 2, the skills go more into depth. So I'm a Health 1 instructor.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
So Health 2, as Kathy said, we have the same, overlying units with the same lenses as it goes through. However, in Health 2, it's the last formal education that they are going to have that encompasses the physical, the social, the emotional, the mental. So what we take from Health 1 to Health 2 is we're going into another depth, a little bit deeper. So these students can take it from sophomore year all the way to senior year, depending upon where it fits in their schedule. So as you read through it, you might find that some of the questions could be similar in nature. It could be taken to 3 levels a little bit deeper, and that coincides because they may have Health 1 freshman year and then Health 2 junior year, and so much has happened in the time that they've had both courses. So obviously, as a class, as people, you self-evolve, you're growing, you're maturing, and because of that, we go through these same units again. But for example, with self-awareness, it goes in how do you create your SMART goal now? What are you going to do for yourself so that you can get to the next level? We often talk in Health 2 about what the path, what your journey is going to be on the things that you have witnessed, experienced, mistakes that you have made. And as we teach through each unit, what can you do to be more self-aware so that you can grow into adulthood? So that you can be the person that you're choosing to be and have these goals set forth for as you move out of NHS. So that goes through self-awareness, and then we also have decision-making skills. With our decision-making skills, again, we get into topics such as with the self-involvement, a letter to their future self would be an example of like where do they see themselves in 5 years, in 10 years. Whether it be nutritionally, academically, socially, within our community. We also get through with growth and development. We talk about contraception as obviously they're evolving into adulthood and making decisions in order to keep their bodies safe and what they can do with that. So those would be obviously topics that go more in depth than it would be in a Health 1. As we move forward into relationship skills, we build upon with relationship skills. We bring the Women's Center of Danbury that just changed their name actually at the end of October to the Center of Empowerment and Education because they don't only foster women, but they foster women, men, and children. And we have educators that come in that talk about health relationships, dating violence, consent and sexual assault, sensitive topics, but yet topics that need to be addressed in order for these students to understand decisions and what they need to do for themselves as they grow. Moving forward into our next, we have the social awareness. With our social awareness, this is usually within our substance abuse unit, okay, we revisit, and this is where our students usually say, we've heard this before, we've done this before, but at the same time, we evolve and we get deeper into our discussions. We get deeper into the safety aspect of, okay, what have you witnessed? What have you heard of? What can you take with you that could be obviously a positive mindset as you move forward in the decision-making skills in substance abuse, as you are socially, accepting with the groups, your peers, and moving forward. Obviously, after NHS, whether it be in the workforce, whether it be college-bound, how are you going to acclimate yourselves and base your decisions within your social circle? And then lastly, again, self-management, what covers all of them, okay, in terms of how to then get to the next level, in terms of, growing from all of the units that we teach, where they can really truly find themselves and where we see themselves in the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester. We reevaluate their SMART goals again at the end of the semester. Were they able to attain their goals? Did they meet them halfway? What can you do for yourself as you move forward? So we're very proud of this, to the fact of this used to be a quarter course. And we have now evolved it to make it so it's a semester course so that we can take each unit a little bit farther and not rush our conversations, not rush the assignments. And so that, if we have a day where there's questions that the students want to ask, we can take that time and truly have those discussions with them, and it helps as they grow.
Yes. The only thing I'm going to add is we are very different than most disciplines because all of ours are intertwined with each other. So we don't teach self-awareness and then move on to the next thing. Self-awareness is involved in everything that we teach. So is responsible decision-making and so on down the list of things. So as people look through our curriculum, they're like, but this looks the same. Well, guess what? You always need to be self-aware. And you always need to make responsible decisions. So yes, it is going to look the same. But as our ensure the content that we are dealing with matures with what is more appropriate for them.
Questions?
Thank you. You kind of answered one of my questions without me asking it, because I did think it was a quarter course, but I'm really happy that it's a semester course now, because I think in addition to the extra time, I think a lot of the topics take time to build trust in the classroom.
Exactly.
And so having that extra time.
And this was state driven. We would always have liked that, and state.
So do students have to take both for, okay, to meet their graduation requirements?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Ideally,
help.
Ideally, Health 1 should be your freshman, sophomore year, maturity-wise, and then Health 2 should be junior, senior year, maturity-wise.
Okay.
We have to exactly like we wanted it to for this first go around. So we're muddling through, and hopefully we'll have that straightened out by.
This is the first year that Health 2 has been.
Okay.
Or, I'm sorry,
Semester.
has been semester.
Okay.
Has been, last year it wasn't. This is the first.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's obvious that you're really passionate about what you do, and I really appreciate the work that you put into this and how timely a lot of topics are, so thank you so much.
It's great to see the growth. I get really big sparks, like our interest of like wanting to do more because of what we see them, change and grow.
Okay. It's true. I see that at home too.
Yeah.
Other questions? Mr. Julia?
First of all, can we share that PowerPoint with the board? Is that possible? I think it's phenomenal. I just wanted to comment. I love the fact that you have the students set goals. I think that's a critical part of success on every level. And I heard you mention goals so many times, and I just want to commend you on that. It's the health is not just physical health; it's mental health, and it's health for the community. And I love what I heard. I just wanted to thank you for that. And I just love the fact that I'm looking up right now. I'm looking up wellness wheels. But I love the fact that. But anyways, just thank you. I think it's awesome. The goal setting, I think, is wonderful. It's all wonderful, but I just think that's a phenomenal way to have the students be forward thinking and be hopefully prepared for all those situations that they need to be prepared for. So thank you very much.
And we keep throwing that back at us through this, because once we start talking about risky behaviors and we bring them back to, these are the goals that you set for yourself. How is that behavior going to interfere with what you have set? So, and it keeps going full circle throughout the whole, all this, right?
Ms. Paskey?
So it sounds pretty comprehensive and all of that. My question is, given the times we live in and the type of courses that these are, have you had any parental pushback? And what types of areas has it been in? How have you handled it, and what type of support do you need?
Well, so I'm getting a little pushback right now with nutrition. I have a group of students that really want to get into eating disorders, and then I have another group of students who want nothing to do with that. So how am I muddling through? Through a lot of discussion. I'm treading lightly, so, and I have great support. We really do have a really good department, really good. Principal is phenomenal. So,
And eating disorders and nutrition are two different animals, right?
right.
Eating healthy is eating healthy. Someone who uses food as their disorder has nothing to do with nutrition. So,
Right.
we first need to educate that process. So, and not getting shut down.
And at this point, you feel you're getting sufficient support to be able to make it through?
Yes, because exactly what Laura was just saying, and talking with the students. We're not talking about, we're talking about how you eat healthy. And it's fun because there's 3 of us who are teaching health at the same time. And so we, during our PLC, spend a lot of time talking about that and looking at these assessments. And they've actually evolved even just a little bit, tweak them just a little bit as we go to make sure that they fit, you know, our needs, the students' needs. That's what we're doing.
I guess the other pushback, I've seen from Health too, is that we do a lot of speaking in terms of presentations. Not a lot, but enough where we do a who am I in the beginning of the semester so that we can get acclimated with one another, find the connections to break down that wall of uncomfortableness because we get into sensitive topics. And the other one that we also do is sexually transmitted infections, in which that they research and they present with a partner. So there's been some times where students are very nervous, apprehensive to be public speaking. It's hard to mask. You know, we do our best to try to make it a safe environment. And I often tell them that if you can public speak about topics such as this in a professional way, when many others cannot do it, I go, you're going to be on the right track for many other speaking things in various areas. But that's one of the other pushbacks. I think because we've had a year and a half where we've been in masks, we haven't been in school. So this semester, I think kids are nervous and apprehensive to get up again. It's coming out of the shell again, in which that we went into a little bit because of all that we've gone through with COVID. But one day, one unit at a time. And the school counseling has been supportive when we bring it. The parents have been supportive when we address it, which is awesome.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Yes.
Because we do have an impact. It's so much better than what
Yes.
having some very hard pushback, especially when we're talking about conversation.
It varies from year to year when the pushback is in the.
Yes.
Ms. Lightline?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Having 3 children who have gone through the program, very much appreciated. Had some wonderful conversations in our household over the years with regard to what was being covered. I'm wondering how much collaboration there is between what happens at pre, what happens at the middle school, and what happens at the high school.
Yes, I see.
That same question, yeah, that same question came up in the CNI. And it is on our radar because actually Andrew Tamara, who is the school health teacher, is now on curriculum council and reviewed their curriculum and made the point that there does need to be more collaboration between both the health and the PE department. So that is something we are looking to plan in the winter at, for one of their DPLCs where we have a vertical meeting so they can have more opportunity to talk about that transition. I think it does happen from Reed, from elementary to Reed, and Reed from middle, but it seems like it doesn't happen as much from middle to high school, so we need to work on that.
Any other questions? Mr. Boris?
I noticed that throughout the presentations, the word diversity is in there, which is a beautiful thing. Has Mr. Johnson seen your curriculum?
That I do not know.
Not yet, okay.
We just met him. Yes. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, so that'll be exciting because I'm sure there'll be great input there to help you with that. And then the other, I guess it's a concern, the eating disorder and the nutrition, the pushback there. Is it because, oh my goodness,
Because we've got kids who struggle with it.
Thank
They
you.
cannot sit in the class and listen to us talk about food, which is,
Okay.
we totally can understand that.
Yes.
And for us to be able to give something alternative for them, just as we have people that need to leave during our sexual assault unit because our of something in there.
Okay.
Right, so it's not.
Thank you.
Right, various
So,
different topics that we have.
We shouldn't remove something because somebody.
No, no, no. And
Right.
that's what I
Make
was,
sure that-
I was getting at, so.
Yeah, no. It's not that we're removing.
No, no,
It's
no,
not-
I know that.
Okay.
I know that. I sensed that there were students who were struggling,
Yes.
and they are getting help that you feel
The
outside.
outside support
Yes,
and within the school, they are,
yeah, good.
yes. Yes.
Yeah.
We do, and I think even in health too, we always, check in who are some trusted adults in the building that you can talk to, and we bring people in, the SRO, student assistance counselor, I'm trying to think who else I've had, guidance counselors, just different, Dr. Long glucose cockpit, assistant principal, so, that's the other thing with Helpline. We do try to bring in all the different support within the building, let alone what's, outside in the community, in the town itself.
So hearing you speak about the curriculum, I mean, we can look at it on paper, but hearing you speak to it just really is so reassuring that what you're providing our students is just really spot on and great for them. And I appreciate you sharing all that with us in person because it really makes a difference in our understanding of what's happening. I want to follow up on Mr. Baros's question about diversity because we did, as a board, more than a year ago, we made a resolution, and I know you may not be aware of the resolution that we took as a board to make sure that our curriculum was viewed through a lens of diversity and inclusion, and I can't remember what, and multicultural and diverse perspectives. And so I just, if we as a board are going to follow through on that, I mean, we made the resolution. We at some point need to address that when we have curriculum come forward to us, and you happen to be the first ones that I'm thinking about, because you do have pieces in here that do address diversity, and I do think that it would be important for us, and aside from just depending on Mr. Johnson to look at all of our curriculum, because I know that's not going to be possible, I do think that we need some way of knowing when curriculum comes to us that it has been viewed through that lens, and I know we talked about that a little bit at the meeting, which was communication was difficult just because we were kind of having breaking up of, it was what, a stormy day when we were doing that meeting. I guess just being able to have something, something specific in the process, and I know, staff is trained in DEI, and that lens is important as you look at this. Obviously, you've included it in the curriculum, but I guess if there's some way that we could say like a specific person is responsible for reviewing the curriculum from that perspective, and not necessarily Mr. Johnson, or a student group, or a combination of student and faculty. I guess I think that would be a way of following up on that resolution that we made a year ago. And I don't know if it's something that can be done with this curriculum right now, but yeah.
So I can speak to this because I'm actually meeting with Mr. Johnson tomorrow, and what we're looking at is, and this is a follow-up to our last board meeting, I think it was, when there was a question about, or maybe it was 2 board meetings ago, when I presented, and there was a question from a parent about timelines and actionable item and measurable items. So what we're doing is meeting tomorrow, and we are looking at those processes that will flesh out each one of those commitments, and curriculum and instruction would be a part of it. Actually, Ann and I just spoke the other day about a student advisory and all of those pieces that will help. So it's not just all falling on him, but he will have support in place around that. So I think that should address it.
And so would that be, as curriculum comes to us, we could say this specific process has been followed?
We need to outline or delineate the processes for each one of those commitments and what that would look like.
Okay.
So there's a systemic process throughout the district, not just for curriculum and instruction, but for everything else that goes along with that.
One of the things, can I just cover one second?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we did because this whole diversity thing jumped in was we realized, so we use a lot of like Greasy YouTube clips for this or like a little movie snippet of that or something. And we looked at it and we were like, whoa, what?
Yeah.
So we went through our stuff and made sure that we went and tried to find the same message, but more diverse. And have added that this year. As a matter of fact, while we were online, and you know, PE online was a ton of research for what can we have these kids doing at home, right? So we would find these awesome videos that they need to know, equipment, and you know, while I was going through all doing that research, I was thinking, whoa, that's right. So I started making sure that I was putting different genders doing the exercises, different races doing the exercises, so that they could pick what they wanted, or sometimes I would make sure that there was no white people, that they had to pick something that wasn't white in their workout for that day or that week or whatever, just to start seeing it differently than, you know, what we're so used to seeing.
That's great. Thank you. That
So just like sneaking it in, right, embedding it without having to say that we're embedding it is kind of, I think how it's going to get there.
that helps a great deal. Thank you. But I also would like to see a process.
Yeah.
But thank you. That
Well, it has to be consistent
Yeah,
too
yeah,
across the
yeah,
district.
absolutely.
Thank you so much. I don't know if anybody else have questions or comments. So
Thank you.
2 weeks, right? We're putting this on the next agenda for approval. So not that you need to come back
Your
for
last
that.
approval for some of them.
Yes. I know.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Way to end with us.
I know. So thank you so much for, I don't think we'll need you back for the final approval, but if we have any questions in the meantime. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys.
Drive safe.
All right, so that brings us to our old business and our policies. Right? Yeah.
I move that the Board of Education approve policy 5145.12, search and seizure.
Second.
Okay, so Mr. Delia makes the motion, Mr. Russo seconds the motion. And then, do you want to speak to it? Anybody?
Yeah.
Ms. Harriman?
Mr. Pompato is just here to answer any other questions. If there were questions, we invited him to come, just because he truly is the expert on both of these policies that are before us here. I do want to clarify, you have the policy search and seizure in front of you. There was a question about the existing policy. The information in the blue is that 7.7-502, I believe. And the reason that has a strange number, just for board members who may not know, in our review of the entire policy book of the board, we are renumbering the policies, so that's why that policy number is so different from this. So in the blue is what was taken from that previous policy, the existing policy, and the red is new language. I don't know if you wanted to reiterate why you felt like it was important to include.
Then around tonight, and Dr. Rodriguez just follow the point to delineate. If you look at the old policy in blue, it's kind of cut and dried. It didn't cover things such as vehicle searches. It was very vanilla, so to speak. So we kind of broke it down step by step, so there's no confusion as to what as how a proper search should be done under those circumstances.
And this is the procedure that we're currently following.
Okay. Any questions? No. All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None, so that passes unanimously. And
5145.124 breathalyzer testing.
I think the only question on this policy was whether or not it was an existing policy, and it actually is not. So, and I apologize for not being clear on that at the last meeting. As I mentioned before, a lot of these policies have been sitting in the queue. I think this one was for years. I do suggest perhaps with the next chair of the policy committee, if that should not be me, we come up with a faster process to get policies through the board, because we have certainly slowed down a bunch in the last couple of years, and so that has really created an issue where it's hard sometimes to recall the ins and outs, and people have moved off the policy committee that were, and it just creates some confusion. So this was a policy that we adapted from a CAVE recommended policy. So our changes are in red, which is not typically how we do things, but this was how it was done at the time. So that's the red you're seeing are changes that were made from the CAVE policy to our policy. And again, this is and has been our practice for a number of years.
And for the sake of procedure, second. I don't think we ever got a second.
Oh, I just started going.
Yep.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you. Did you get that, Ken? Okay. I think she assumed. It's usually that order.
Yeah, I do remember, both of these policies having been in the queue. All right, so any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None? That passes unanimously. Thank you for,
No problem.
thank you so much for
No problem.
for
Have a
hanging
good
around.
You're welcome to stick around if you want.
That's right, there's more exciting stuff to
More
come.
fun?
Yep,
Michelle, I have a question
Mr. Morris.
for Rebecca. How far along are we in this, the queue of policies? I mean, are there like 150 more?
There's a lot.
There's a lot.
We've completed the 5,000 series and the policy committee, but many of those have not yet made it to the board. There was a time when we were bringing the entire policy packet for each series, so the 5,000 series, we bring the entire number. When I started, that's what Michelle and I were doing. We found that that wasn't really the proper way to do things because it was just overwhelming for board members. And then we were also feeling like we had done all this work and was anybody really looking at it, you know? So to give the board more of an opportunity to look through things, we started doing 10 policies at a time. And then that became too big of a conversation at board meetings. So then we had 5 policies at a time, and now we're really down to only being able to move 2 policies at a time through the board. So that, I think is a conversation that we can continue having just about, the trust that the board members put in the policy committee to do the work of the policy committee, just like we do in curriculum instruction and the communications committee. But that's a conversation for another day and a new board, and I'm happy to have that at that time. But I just think we need to come up with a way to be able to move policies through quicker because policies are a really important part of our work, and we are well behind where we should be in moving them forward.
Mr. Grosky, do you know how many total policies we have?
It's got to be probably
500? 500,000?
Yeah, 500.
Easily.
Yeah.
I counted what was listed, but I'm sure we have a lot of policies that have been pulled off and are not listed, and that number was around 400.
Yeah, there's new policies that get recommended. There's a lot of policies.
Some of what's in the queue is new policies that wouldn't show up quite yet
Right.
because they haven't been approved yet.
Right, and it's just, I was not on the board when this process started, but we have already had to go back and redo policies that initial look back started doing well before I came. So we're sort of doing the moving forward, trying to finish everything out, but at the same time, we continuously have to go back and adjust policies based on new legislation or, just new work. And obviously the pandemic gave us a lot more work to do. All right.
I'm sorry I asked the question.
All right, where are we? Did we vote on non-lapsing account, which actually that whole, I don't know, discussion about trusting other groups to do work, that comes into play in a great way in this discussion. So before we make a motion on this is maybe going to take a little bit of discussion. So the Legislative Council is looking over this evening. Board of Finance looked it over and took action on it. Board of Finance, so Legislative Council will be waiting for us to see what we come up with this evening. Board of Finance went ahead and took action, and they adopted mostly what the work group came up with, only they changed the title of the preamble to something else.
Right there.
It's,
It's,
preamble to purpose. It's now purpose instead of preamble. So they made that change, and then they also made a change about the capital improvement plan. And I don't know if you all have had a chance to read that specific change, but it's maybe important. So they adopted what the work group had put forward with 2 changes. They did have a copy of our legal counsel's recommendation. So we have the work group's copy, we have our legal counsel's recommendation on it, which I think I forwarded to you the same copy that I forwarded to the Legislative Council and the Board of Finance. It was slightly revised from what was presented at our last meeting because the Legislative Council had requested that I make sure that there were no substantive changes from what the work group had recommended. So I did actually take out, our legal counsel had put in specific dates because he thought that was more appropriate, but I changed it back to what the work group had recommended because that's what Legislative Council was asking. And I would like us to try to find something that all of our boards can agree on. So, given that, I guess, I think maybe it's best to see if there's a consensus on which version we should be working with. And then if there, maybe that version doesn't need any amendments, but if there are minor amendments to be made, we'll work with that version. So, does anybody have any thoughts on which version to work with? Yes, Ms. Ryan.
I just think in the spirit of trying to move something forward, and the fact that there's really not any real substantive changes that our attorney made to what the working group made, I almost feel like we should look at the policy that the working group put together, and maybe entertain the changes that the Board of Finance suggested as just a path to move forward and come to an agreement.
Ms. Lightline and then Ms. Kowski.
As a member of the working group, I entered into the discussion about the final product that would be brought forward, knowing that there were some things that I did not agree with in the draft of the final document that the work group proposed, and was grateful that what we proposed would be brought forth to our legal counsel, because I think it's very important, and I'm not a lawyer, and the members of the group understood that boards would be bringing this document to their legal counsel and would be relying on their legal counsel to evaluate the documents and to determine what was the best course of action going forward, the wording that would be the best wording to avoid any pitfalls. And so I wholeheartedly went into agreeing with the document that the work group proposed, knowing that that document would go toward legal counsel, and that what legal counsel proposed would be what I would support. So I am totally in support of how legal counsel amended the document and trust wholeheartedly in the advice of legal counsel in moving forward in their work.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kowski?
I fully agree with Ms. Liley. There are little tricks in here. We'll get to the point where they use time stamps as opposed to the others. I have questions about taking those out. The language is very fine. Like he put in a recommendation from the Board of Finance, if any.
Right.
Okay, and that's very important because if for some reason the charter revision makes the Board of Finance, an appointed long-term type of research group, then this would not necessarily be under their purview. So I was very impressed with the legal version, and think that it is much tighter, much crisper, and much more understandable.
Anybody else have a preference? Go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to say thank you to Ms. Sideline for saying that, because I don't think I was aware that the working group had all agreed that legal counsel would be further reviewing the document. So, I mean, that information is helpful for me, and, I really will, since you were on the work group, I will agree with your recommendation, having that further information. So, thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'll just, maybe we're coming to a point where we can decide on which one, but I'll just further confirm that I think there's some ambiguous language in here that, so there were points where it says, subject to the approval of the legislative council considering recommendation from the Board of Finance. So the Board of Education, subject to the approval of the legislative council considering recommendation from the Board of Finance. It's not clear whether it's the considering the Board of Ed or the legislative council. It just isn't clear, and I think to Ms. Zukowski's point, the legal counsel's language is much more crisp and clear about who's doing what in this whole process. So I would suggest that we go with the legal counsel. Mr. DeLeo.
I agree, we should go with the legal counsel's recommendation. Why would we send it to the legal counsel if we weren't going to go with their recommendation? I think that's kind of the way I look at it. So that's just my short and sweet opinion.
And I get the whole piece about trying to make sure that we're all recognizing the work of the work group, but I do think that is a piece to consider, is that legal counsel was supposed to be part of that process. No. And to be clear, there is a big difference in that the legal counsel took out the preamble, and now, I mean, we could amend that in any way, but he was very clear that this information that's in the preamble does not belong in a policy at all. When you're making reference to specific legal counsel discussions and, I don't know, the history, which I'm not sure is accurate necessarily. So
It's exceedingly biased history.
It's also not accurate.
okay, so I will entertain a motion
How would you like me to?
That we accept.
I move that we accept the policy reviewed and revised by the board attorney and send that to legislative council. Or do I
Just, we can accept it and then.
for discussion? Are we sending it for discussion?
No, what I think, okay, let me back up. I think we need to just make a motion on which version that we are going to accept as a Board of Education, and then once the Board of Education accepts the version and any amendments, then I, as board chair, will share that with the other boards.
I move that we accept the policy as amended by the non-lapsing education fund policy agreement between Board of Education, Board of Finance, and Legislative Council as amended by the board attorney.
Second.
All right, so
just like to thank Mrs. Ledline for all of her efforts on the work group. She was awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I concur.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, and thank you, board members who were part of it also were exceedingly helpful. It was a process. It was an interesting exercise in patience.
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 And patience.
And we have much more to come to. I thank you.
Yes, that is, thank you, thank you, thank you, because this is important, very important work. And I watched the two meetings and I'm glad that we got to this point. All right, so we have a motion to accept the attorney's version. Is there any, knowing that the other boards need to accept whatever we propose, and knowing that the Board of Finance has already revised, that, I mean, you can take into account what the Board of Finance already thinks should be revised? Is there any other, Mr. Kowski?
So, yeah, so we've got the motion on the table to accept this. Shall we do amendments while this motion is open?
Yes.
Now, I see that you had changed the attorney's dates. Okay, and I have, so could we have a discussion before we make the motion so that I can understand and you can, so that we can have a common meeting of mine?
Yeah.
Now, those of you who know me know I am very, very fine, detailed type of person to the point of being maybe excessively so. When I see something no later than the first week of September, the first thing that goes through my mind is that the beginning of the first week of September or the end of the first week of September? And then is it the first whole week of September or is it partial? So if the 1st of September is Saturday, you know, that would be the end of the first week of September in some books, but not in others. So I look at this language as very ambiguous. People reading it could come up with 14 different things. The dates could move from September 1st to September 14th, depending on what they come up with. And it seemed like September 1st, given that our meeting for the board to approve what to transfer to the non-lapsing happens in the last week of August, was just a nice, straightforward way of doing things. The next one, we're just...
Can we talk about that one first?
Okay, okay, yes.
Yeah, Mr. DeLeo.
So what is the purpose of it being no later than the first week of September as opposed to on or before September 1st?
So I changed that because that's what the work group came up with, and my understanding was that Bob Tate had been a part of that.
Not necessarily.
I thought,
So may I continue?
well, I guess I'd like to know from Ms. Ledline, was that the case, that Bob Tate was part of it?
That, yes, because that was his discussion as to when events happened with regard to when the end of the year was finalized by the Board of Ed and the beginning of the discussion as to what would happen with the end of the year funds would begin.
Question?
Wait, just 1 second. And do you know, was Ms. Vadas a part of it?
That's this one.
It's in the board packet.
In the board packet, okay, that's
So-
the other thing, and I get it, okay.
Question for what Ms. Lideline had said. So I know he was involved in terms of the general timeline, but was he involved with the language no later than the first week, or did he say, you know, it should be ready by the first week?
Yeah, I think that the discussion was that it would be the end of August when the Board of Education would finalize their books. And so therefore, saying September 1st was the day in which a decision needed to be made might be too confined and that there needed to be more of an extension of time in between when the Board of Education finalized their numbers.
Mr. Elliott?
So, yeah, the way that you close the books by the end of August, correct? So,
Yes.
then this is just sending the notice, and then the next line was giving them 2 weeks for the Board of Finance to take it up, correct?
Yeah.
That's the whole.
Right.
And Bob, I think that was how that, I was in that one, I was there for that, so.
And I believe he also talked to Tanya on that.
And Tanya was
She
involved,
also-
yes.
Right.
We had Tanya review this.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm speaking without being called on. Tanya reviewed this.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so does that,
So what I'm hearing is that on or before September 1st is what you feel that Bob agreed to, and then 2 weeks, September 15th, or the more, no later than the first week, and then we just have to somehow say if it's the beginning, if it's the end, if it's a whole week or a partial week.
Well, I think in saying that no later than the first week of September for the Board of Education to send notice gives the Board of Education time to close their books and then a few days in order to send notice. Then eliminating the on or before September 15th of each year and just saying the Board of Finance and the Legislative Council shall hold a meeting means that depending on the time frame and how the days fall with regard to weekends and such, there can be ample amount of time for them to schedule an appropriate meeting in order to have that discussion. So in my opinion, and I've said this over and over again, the more confinement you put on the process, the more difficulty you have in doing the process correctly.
yes, Mr. Costa?
My problem is just parsing no later than the first week and what it means. So I can say no later than the beginning of the first week. John could say no later than the end of the first week. You know, and it needs to be something that the language really captures it. Now, I hear.
It really doesn't. It really doesn't.
So I hear your.
It really doesn't
Point
need
of
to
order,
be.
point of order. I hear your concern about the 1st of September. And I'm happy to say, you could say the 7th of September, or you could say the end of the first week, the first full week of September. And I think that would solve, either one of those would solve the problem.
Okay,
I
so,
really don't think it
wait,
needs to be.
hold on.
about-
So I would suggest that if you want to see if board members are in favor of that, that you make the motion and speak to it. You wanted to have discussion to see if you had
Okay.
reasons for why that is the way it is.
Yeah, okay, so I'll make the motion just simply to add one little word that I think will give us the maximum flexibility. No later than, my motion is to change no later than the first week of September to no later than the end of the first week of September.
Okay, so that's your motion.
That's my motion.
Second for discussion.
Mr. Cruzan seconds the motion. Mr. D'Elia. Well, do you want to call the question?
Yeah.
Or do
I
you
want to
want?
call the question.
All right, so if you call the question, then we need to vote. You need to have a second on that. I think you need a second. Ms. Harriman seconds, calling the question now. Yeah, okay.
So you have to have, could you call the question, you have to have a second?
Rebecca said.
So Rebecca, Ms. Harriman is second.
Okay, so hang on. So Dan called the question.
No.
No, I
Deb.
called.
Mrs. Weidman, I'm
Mrs.
sorry, I didn't announce
Sorry.
that.
And Rebecca said.
Yeah. All right, so all those in favor of calling the question now? Aye. Any opposed? None. So that passes unanimously. So we have the motion to amend no later than the end of the first week of September. So if you're in favor of that, all those in favor? And those opposed? All right, so that motion fails with Ms. Dukowski voting in favor. And is there further, Mr. D'Elia?
Miss Debbie, do you think it would be get to go to September 7th? Do you think it matters? In your discussions on?
I think the wording that is proposed here, no later than the first week of September, I think that is sufficient. I think it gives leeway, and to be, yeah, that's what I will say. I think it's appropriate.
Mr. Cruzen?
Thank you.
Just for clarification, it looks like this when I look back, but that was the original wording
Yes.
that came out of the working group, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And I would like to speak to that point, that I think that we need to try to stick to what the work group has presented as closely as possible, even if we disagree with, we need to find a way to make this work for everybody, and I don't think that changing a lot of things is going to help. So that's my position on it. Ms. Harriman?
So just to clarify, the changes that we're seeing here in red are changes that you went and made based from the attorney's recommendation. You looked back at what the board group had proposed and tried to copy that language, mirror that language as much as possible in our attorney's version.
Yes,
Okay.
based on the legislative council's request when I went to their meeting.
Okay, I just wanted to, there's so many versions.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, you don't even know.
Go back and look at the minutes. Ms. Zukowski?
So the next one, just to get through, again, my understanding of why the attorney would have put in a specific date is without it, the time they would be unbounded, and it could conceivably be after Bob Tate closes the books. And so I'm just trying to figure out why the attorney thought it important to put a specific date. So in this case, you could have this, they're just going to hold a non-lapsing a joint meeting, but it could be in September, October, November. There's generally, when people write policies like this, where there is something that's basically bouncing from board to board, there's usually time limits, think in terms of filling vacancies. Whether the time limits are reasonable or not, there are usually time limits. This one, the way it's written, there's no notion of exactly when that joint meeting actually has to happen.
So would you like to make a motion?
Well, what I would move is that I would move that the Board of Finance and the Legislative Council consider discussing putting a time limit, perhaps with input from Bob Tate, on when that joint meeting would
So you're
occur.
making this outside of what's written here, you want a separate recommendation, like,
In our letter, we just make that suggestion that this one is open-ended, and we just ask, like I just said it, we request that the Board of Finance and Legislative Council consider together when an appropriate end date to having a joint meeting would be. I don't think it's our point, I don't think it's our place to put any time on it.
so you're making a motion to write in the transferal letter, requesting that the Board of Finance and Legislative Council have a discussion with Bob Tate to set a date for this specific section.
Yeah.
All right, so that's your, Ms. Zukowski's motion. Does that make sense? Okay. And will anybody second that motion?
I'll second it.
Mr. Cruzan seconds the motion.
And we can just go ahead and vote on how it's going to go.
Mr. Delia, did you want to
I
say
just don't
something?
understand, I'm confused. That we're going to make a motion to write a letter when we're discussing,
You're right, that is,
how can we make a motion to write a letter?
well, you're right, so that's
So
not
that's a
amending.
totally outside of this.
You're right. that
So we
is-
really shouldn't be doing this.
Can I comment?
Ms. Lund.
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, there's so many things that can impact when that meeting happens. It could be the day of the week, it could be, what's happening in the world, it could be what's happening in Connecticut, it could be what's happening in Newtown, that can affect that. I've experienced that from my time on the board. I would say that I would wait until we have the Board of Selectmen meet, and after Board of Selectmen, Legislative Council meet, who I'm sure are conferring with Bob Tate, who, if he had an issue with that timetable, would make a recommendation with regard to that. But I would say that, and I've said this over and over again, if you set these strict parameters, it becomes a very difficult situation. I think you need to go into it with as much flexibility as possible. I have never known the Legislative Council or Bob Tate to let it go out of September to have that discussion with the Board of Education as to what the end of the year finances were and what should be done with those finances.
Mr. D'Elia?
And he has to close the books.
Right.
Which it's kind of it's a deadline regardless.
Right.
Ms. Harriman?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna sound like a broken record. So no date was what the work group suggested, and Bob Tate had input into having no date, and this is something that he was comfortable with at the time, and Tanya also was comfortable with that. Okay.
All right, so there's Mr. Crusoe?
I was going to say, I'm not positive, I'm trying to read the old version, and this section ends with "in each fiscal year," which almost makes it sound like it says the Legislative Council, considering recommendation from the Board of Finance, may authorize deposits into the non-lapsing fund in each fiscal year. I'm not sure if that means that they will have that they will consider that recommendation within the fiscal year, meaning before Bob Tate lists the books. So I'm wondering what the intention of that, the way that
Does
sentence
Bob
is
Tate
phrased.
close the books?
But that, I think I was wondering if there's any guidance on why the work group phrased it quite, added the "in each fiscal year" there, and whether that might address this question.
I don't think that in each fiscal year, if my recommendation is correct, meant that the decision had to be made, but that it was,
The money from that fiscal
Correct.
year. Yes. That's what I was trying to wrap my head around, is why it was phrased that way, and whether it addressed this concern or something else.
right.
Where are you seeing is it the older version?
Yes, it's the old version,
Okay.
section 2, letter B.
Okay. And again, I would defer to what our legal counsel.
Well,
But then.
but we're talking about amending what our legal
Right,
counsel said.
that's what I understand.
All right, so it's, actually, I don't know, we're discussing an amendment not on this document, but rather the transfer letter. So let's just, I know that's not proper procedure,
We
but I'm
can
just.
table the discussion and then bring it up afterwards. If somebody would, either we've got two votes, so we have to get a motion in a second, so we have to.
I'm just going to allow us to vote on it right now.
Okay.
Just to move on. What are we voting? We're voting on whether in the transfer letter, I asked that Bob Tate, Legislative Council of Board of Finance, be asked to come up with
Wait a minute, are we saying Bob Tate, Legislative Council, and the Board of Finance?
Okay, in the transfer letter, okay? Everybody understand?
Yes.
All right, all those in favor? All right, all those opposed? All right, so that motion fails. Ms. Zukowski voting in favor. Is there?
Just one more that can be very, very quick, because we know how it's going to go. Again, just reading it very, very literally. At the end, section 5, the Legislative Council and the Board of Finance, they're going to send the annual report. At the time a request for deposit is made, and this is supposed to be annual. And my question simply is, what happens if we have a year with which the request for deposit is not made? And again, I try and figure out why the lawyer put in a date And I think that that's one understanding. There's no guarantee every year we're going to make a request for deposit. It's likely, but it's not guaranteed. But we have to provide a report annually.
Okay. Is there a motion you're making? Do you want to make a motion on that?
My motion at this point would be to move the date from August 1st to September 1st to give Tanya more time. But, so I move to change to reinstate the lawyer's language and change the date to September 1st.
Okay, I don't know if, Kathy, do you have that in front of you? Do you know what that is? Yeah, okay. So reinstate the language on or before and make it September 1st of each year.
Second.
In section 5. All right, so Ms. Zukowski makes the motion, Mr. Cruzan seconds the motion. Is there discussion on this? Mr. Cruzan?
I see the point there, that it is possible that we might not have that we might have a year where we don't make a deposit, and if we are calling it an annual, if we are saying we're going to provide the information on an annual basis, there should be some fallback there. I'd probably rather mirror the language earlier and say no later than the first week of September, so that we're either transmitting the deposit request with the annual or just the annual. That's just my thing.
Mr. Delia?
This is, whether there's a deposit or not, the report is prepared regardless. So, it doesn't matter if there's a deposit made.
But what we're saying, but the edit to this says at the time of a request for deposit is made, so the policy is saying we'll send the report with the request.
Got it.
I'm on the
No, I was just going to say, I don't read it like that. I read it that the annual report to the Legislative Council and the Board of Finance is necessary when there's a deposit being requested. That's how I read it, okay?
Yeah. And
If there's no deposit being made, there's not a formalized, we need to go to the Legislative Council and Board of Finance and report something we typically do not report.
Right. And I will add that in the original work group's proposal, it does say under section 3, part C, as part of the communication in section 2A above, which is the request to deposit funds, the Board of Education will provide a written summary of the non-lapsing funds balance and expenditures for the prior fiscal year. So it would only happen in years that you make the request.
And that's actually what happened this past year. That was part of my letter to them.
All right, so
It's just another ambiguity.
okay, so there is a motion, right? And Mr. Cruzan seconded the motion. Is there any further discussion on the motion? All right, all those in favor? All right, so, and then all opposed? All right, so that fails with Ms. Zukowski, Mr. Delia, and Mr. Cruzan voting in favor.
Well, I have two more, and again, I try and keep them very, very, very short, okay? Number one is that we have a policy that talks about designating funds, okay?
How about can you make the motion and then you can speak to the motion? Is there a motion that each of these has?
I'm fine either way, it just, we have to understand the repercussions.
Well,
So if we leave it as it is.
No, here's my issue, that if you're asking for discussion so you can decide whether to make a motion or not, that's fine, but if we're having the discussion and then you make the motion, then we have more discussion, then it's not.
Okay, so I'm asking for discussion to see whether or not I should make a motion. So,
Okay.
in our special ed contingency, we talked about the Board of Education requests that the Board of Finance, that any balance is special education contingency line at the end of the fiscal year be deposited in the non-lapsing education fund and be designated for special education purposes, and that these monies retain the special education designation within the account, and be it further resolved that prior to any expenditure from the non-lapsing account, the Board of Education will vote to authorize such spending, and the board will expend these funds for such previously designated purpose except under extraordinary or emergency circumstances. And so then, based on this, we appended the policy that basically gave us the opportunity to say we want these funds designated. And then what we would be able to do once they're designated is not have to go through another, because they were already designated, we wouldn't have to go through another process. We could just pull them out and use them for special education. But since this particular policy does not recognize the concept of designation, and Debbie, for good reason, because that was going to be a big thorn because of what they were trying to do with the designation, my sense is we just stick with what they have in the policy, but we have to redo our current policies that talk about designation, and we have to redo, to some degree, likely, the special education resolution. And I'm fine going that way if the rest of this board feels that that's the best way to go, given the current circumstances.
Yeah, this is tricky. Ms. Harriman, did you have something? I guess I've thought about this because we did spend a lot of time talking about designating funds for this special education account and having the contingency line in our budget, and this policy would ignore that. I believe that it is best to just pass this policy as it is, and then if the other boards are in agreement with doing that special education designation, then we can request it at the time that we make the request and do it that way. Ms. Weinlein?
In our discussion in the group, I am very much in favor of saying this money was set aside specifically for special education, so much so that we made a contingency fund in the budget for special education funds. What I'm worried about with saying something in this policy about designation is that then does every penny we deposit into this account have to be designated for a specific purpose and can only be taken out for that specific purpose. To that, I am not interested whatsoever. That is way too much hand time for the Board of Education. So I don't want to redo our policy, but I also don't want it talked about in here that funds have to be designated for a specific purpose when they're deposited into this account. That was my issue with the designation that Ms. Zukowski talked about when we had the word.
Mr. Tilius?
Yeah, we were very clear in our discussion in the work group that we wanted this to be for educational purposes only. We really pushed for that it would be very general because it's really up to the board how to spend the money. And we still have to talk to them about the spending of the money, but we should, having it being used for educational purposes as per the statute really kind of gives leeway for what we need.
Mr. Kowski?
So 2 years ago, we requested something be moved for special education. And I heard Ned talk about the fact that we were asking to designate money for special education, and he did not think that designation was proper. So my reading of not having any language for designation within the tribe body policy means that they really don't expect us to ask for any designation. Now that doesn't mean we can't set an account in our private use, but we can't really call it designation because designation has a meaning throughout the town in that once it's designated, you can just go and grab it, as we learned from the capital non-recurring when we wanted to get to the COVID money. So I think that the changes we have to make to the special ed resolution would be somewhat minor. The changes we have to make to the policies, we just have to pull out a couple of paragraphs. But my sense is if we decide we don't want designation in the tri-body thing, that we pull the word designation out of our policies. Otherwise, there's a conflict of interpretation.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Harriman.
You know, I have lots of strong feelings about the special ed contingency fund, but I do believe that I agree with what Ms. Lideline and Mr. Delia were saying, and I also agree with Ms. Zukowski that it can be a word other than designation in our own, you know, accounting, you know, so that we are moving funds to the non-lapsing account, but we know that we have funds that are meant for special education. I mean, it was never meant that we wouldn't have to go to other boards to pull from the non-lapsing fund. That's not what the special education fund was about. So whether we're going to them to ask for, you know, something to support the turf field, or we're asking to support, you know, our transportation line item in special education, I don't really think it so much matters as long as we know what the funds are meant for from the onset.
Mr. Crusoe?
I was just going to say, I don't see the absence of anything in this from automatically precluding us from putting something in our request. We can request, we can make the request, and they could, I mean, that doesn't preclude them from deciding to modify the request or deny a part of the request. But I don't see this policy as precluding us from even using the word designate if we so desire in our future requests.
I agree with that 100%. Dr. Henry?
I was just going to say, and right now I feel, and just having gone through it recently, there's more transparency. And that's why when we go, whatever letter I send to use the funds, we usually put in what we want to use, possibly what we want to use those funds for. And it could be a variety of things. This year it wasn't, but it could be a variety of things. So I just like the transparency, and I think they're feeling it on their end as well, that we're being far more transparent with the process. So.
All right. Okay.
And then just one more clarification.
Yeah.
So with the CIP projects that we want to offer money up for funding, that is going to be very much structured on the annual CIP process. So if we decide 2 months after the CIP has been approved that we want to put money for something that's on the CIP, we have to wait until the next process starts. That's what this language says. But I'm absolutely fine with that. I just wanted to make sure that you all were in agreement to that.
I'm okay with it. I mean, clearly the Board of Finance had wanted to modify that, and I'm not even sure I understand what the modification means, but, all right. That, I think, do you want any other feedback on that?
As long as everybody's fine with it, I'm fine.
All right. Any other amendments? All right, so we're back to the original motion with our attorney's version of the non-lapsing policy. So, understanding that, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
That's with your modified version of the attorney's letter.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So all those in favor, right? Okay. That passes unanimously. Thank you. That was, got through that complicated discussion with an outcome. All right, so that brings us to, what does it bring us to? Our first read on policy 3160. Budget procedures and line item transfers. So, Ms. Harriman?
Sure. This came back to policy after a discussion at the last board meeting. We had adapted the policy based on what Ms. Vadas had presented spoken to us at a policy meeting. It turns out there was more information, and so we have further amended it after a further discussion with Ms. Vadas at our policy meeting. So before you is what we came up with at our last policy meeting. The initial change that you all approved a few months ago was about transfers within major object codes. And the additional change you see now is about transfers between major object codes. So not within the major object codes, but between major object codes. The example she gave us is that sometimes the salary and the benefits line, those are different object codes, and those numbers, she has to be able to make more fluid transferring. Obviously, she will reference them in the monthly financial report, but this gives her more leeway to do that, just if the transfers are less than $10,000. So that was a change that I believe the CFF committee was also agreeable to, and so we are bringing that to you for a first reading today.
Very good, thank you. Ms. Wachowski?
I have a question for Mr. Delia, because I remember when all of this started, it's so confusing when they do these little transfers from one to the other, and I recall you saying, don't do the transfer, just let things go negative, and she seemed receptive to that, but I don't see how, the changes here would make a difference to that.
So that change was already made in your last review of this policy. So if you'll see in the paragraph where all the changes were made, that sentence, notice of major object codes falling into a negative balance will be included in the monthly financial report. That was the initial change that you all made. We added the word also because we had talked about the financial report in the sentence previous, but that change was already approved by the board previously a few months ago. That was something that was the other thing that Tanya had spoken to us about the first time.
Ms. Wachowski, you see that?
Yeah, I saw that, but there was something else earlier that said all major codes would be positive, above. So my request is just to go and make sure that there's not another vestige which might, so it says the year-end report shall reflect all major object codes in the positive balance. Is that keeping?
That's year-end.
That's year-end?
Yeah.
Where is
So-
that?
Well,
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, Mr. Delia.
she's going to balance the books at the end of the year. So, but we'll have the negative numbers just up to that point.
Okay.
So that should help with budgeting and seeing what I don't want to say truly, but seeing where the accounts fall. And then she's going to make the adjustments at the end, so it will give you a reference point.
Perfect.
Does that
As long
help clarify it?
As long as you're comfortable with it.
I am very comfortable with it. I do like the fact that we're going to let some of the objects go into the negative so that we can see where we're spending more money than we have or than we budgeted. And I also like the fact that we're letting Ms. Vadas make these transfers and just give us a summary of these transfers if they're under $10,000 between object codes.
Yes, we had a party discussion about it. I appreciate that you are.
One more request for between now and the second read. If you go down to the bottom of the second page, I guess, you see the section called adding funds to the non-lapsing educational account. And then at the top of the next thing, you see removing funds from the non-lapsing educational account that talks about designating funds for specific purposes. If you could review those to make them consistent with the tri-body policy that we just voted on.
I only hesitate to do that, and then because the other boards haven't yet voted on language, I don't know.
Doesn't that go back to Mr. Cruzon's point that nothing precludes us from doing this? We could request of the other boards to designate money. I'm sorry, Mr. Cruzon. Ms. Wachowski.
But the removal basically said once money was designated, we didn't have to go through the approval process. That's what's,
We will actually, we'll discuss it at the policy meeting and we'll come back to suggestions.
I do think Mr. Crusoe's point is valid, though, that we're not precluded from doing anything. Okay, so that, any questions beyond that will come to you before your next meeting, which is probably next Wednesday? Okay. All right, so that brings us to discussion and possible action on communication subcommittee newsletter. I'll entertain a motion.
I move that the Board of Education approve the November 2021 Communications Subcommittee newsletter.
Second.
All right, and then Mr. Delia, do you want to speak to your motion?
I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Cruz.
Excellent. Mr. Crusoe.
What I sent out on Monday after our communications meeting is the final version of our student success newsletter, which covers various ways in which we try to help students succeed as they move from our school district to whatever they decide to do after school, after high school. And we cover things such as capstone. We talked about the business department over at the beat department over at the high school. We talked about the community partnerships, which works with the special education students after the age of 18. And then we talked about the portrait of a graduate framework. Is that the appropriate? And then we took a closer look. We talked with Noreen Morgenstern over at the high school college and career center. So, and we hope that you like it and we'll approve it to go out to everyone this week.
Can I just say, I found one verb that we have to change.
Of course you did.
I'm sorry. I just saw it tonight, and it's in my own article, so.
I wonder if we could, well, I wonder if we could just amend the motion to allow Mr. Cruzan to make minor edits.
Okay.
I move to amend the motion to allow Mr. Cruzan to make minor edits at the meeting.
Okay. All right, so Ms. Stokowski makes the motion to allow minor edits. Ms. Harriman seconds. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So that passes unanimously. And then, is there anything else that anybody would like to? Okay, so. Yes, that's a tour de force. It really is. You bring these to us, so thank you. All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None, so that passes unanimously.
Please email me the edits.
So easy.
I'm looking forward to getting these newsletters in the future.
Oh, yeah, I was
I don't get
curious,
this sneak peek.
how do you do the volume, when does it become volume 2?
Probably with the next newsletter, we actually discussed that at our last.
Oh, okay. All right. That'll bring us to our authorization and signatures, and I'll entertain a motion.
I move that the Board of Education authorize Dr. Lori Edrig and Mrs. Tanya Vadas to execute agreements, to apply for grants, or to sign other documents as may be necessary in the normal course of the school system's business, including documents that support the adopted budget or that implement the board's established policies or programs.
Second.
Mr. Delia makes the motion, Mr. Cruzan seconds the motion. Is there any questions or discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None, so that passes unanimously. And that brings us to the minutes of October 18th.
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes of October 19, 2021.
Second.
Mr. Delia makes the motion, Mr. Cruzan seconds the motion. Please. Mr. Kowski.
If I could just amend the minutes for the last paragraph of item 6 to be consistent with the transcription of the discussion, because there were some pretty heavy like learning the learning practices, which really showed my sense of where I was going. It was not just kids sitting at a community sitting. So I think that the paragraph needs to go and as a whole for people that really understand the concept.
So you're making a motion to make the change,
The last paragraph of item 6
last paragraph
on page 4 to reflect the transcription.
and the transcription, is the one that I provided by email late this afternoon.
Exactly.
Did everybody see that? Know what we're talking about?
Is it, oh, she made a motion.
Second.
Ms. Zukowski makes a motion, Mr. Cruson seconds it, Mr. Delia.
Is this I didn't watch the transcript and check, is it word for word what was said?
You have my honor that it is word for word, other than the ums and the ers, and the double say to. You have my honor that it is exactly what was said.
So we're just putting the paragraph of the transcript into the minutes. All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None. All right, so that passes unanimously. And now we have to vote on the minutes. Are there any other edits or changes? All right, so voting on the minutes as amended, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None. So that passes unanimously. Brings us to October 25th.
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes of October 25, 2021.
Second.
Mr. Delia makes the motion, Mr. Cruson seconds the motion. Are there any questions, comments, changes? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None. So that passes unanimously. And that brings us to our second public participation. I would invite anybody up from the audience who would like to participate in our second public participation this time. Nobody? Okay. We'll close out public participation then.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Delia makes the motion, Mr. Cruson seconds, and all those in favor. Aye. All right, we are adjourned.